Clearly, as there is no edit software quite yet that can keep up with the mind of the professor when he is ranting and raging in the laboratory, it is time to break down and use audio. Right now I have what's known as edit fever. I want to put together more and more videos. I keep thinking about which video I could put together next, and they come together in my mind so quickly from all the cuts I have saved on my phone, but I cannot put them together quick enough. Only my voice can tell you what will happen next. Yes. Well, this is almost as bad as AP fever. What is AP fever? Ammonium perchlorate. Yes, the propellant for rocket engines. Yes, what happens when you give your child an Estes rocket kit? Back when I was kids, you actually had to put them together. Most kids looked at the instructions, tossed them aside, and they wound up in the garbage. Or perhaps they just burned the engine or two they were given in the kit, although back then they didn't even come with that. No, you had to go get engines. Forget about that. They wound up in the garbage. But the select few put them together and managed to get them to fly or fly apart or whatever. And they flew, they got caught in trees, they crashed, they burned, they whatevered, and they were mildly amused, but they ran away. But the select few, we're talking 4 or 5%, got black powder fever, and they started building the little Estes flying model rockets over and over again, larger and larger. Yes. Then some of them rediscovered in later life, as I did, that now there were indeed reloadable rocket engines which burned the same propellant that the space shuttle did in its side boosters and produced the most glorious display of white fire and thunder you have ever seen this side of heaven. Now, what is the little fetus with a mind the size of a planet to do but to indulge in such a thing? In the beginning, he buys a little modest kit and puts together, a half an ounce of propellant and lets a rocket go. But soon that does not satisfy him. Just as the heroin junkie craves more and more, the engines get larger and larger. Before you know it, he is spending $15 or $20 for a motor that burns for 2.1 seconds. And as soon as he has recovered the rocket, if he does, he just wants another hit, more larger. Yes, maybe a $30 hit he's thinking about this time. And how can you get a bigger rocket going? Well, in my case, this went on and on. Yes. I flew the 1 mile project to God's glory, a 6-foot rocket with a J570, a motor the size of a goddamn thermos, lit 11 Bates grains of white lightning propellant at once. Yes, and for a brief shining second it would deliver 500 pounds of thrust. That's right, it would lift 2 Professor Boz's off the ground at once for a split second. That's only oscillatory combustion, mind you. Then it would settle into 210 pounds of thrust and maintain it for several seconds, taper off, and then let that rocket glide to the heavens, slipping the surly bonds and fondling God's face. Yes. Anyway, so I built this rocket, and the winds were heavy. We had gone out to a sod farm, and my club had filed for the appropriate FAA waiver and clearances and everything else. And indeed, the entire club was curious to see what I had done. I had built a 3.5-inch rocket that went 3 feet, then tapered down to a 2.1-inch rocket with an ogive nose cone on the front. Yes. It had a single-stage recovery, so that means that the thing just blew in half and a parachute came out. The parachute was constructed from a black umbrella, which I had super-glued all the seams on, cut a hole in the top, and then taken Gorilla Tape and taped basically what is 180-pound test nylon cord to each one of its little seam joints. And then I had indeed rammed additional cyanoacrylate, that is super glue, under each one of the pieces of Gorilla Tape where they connected. And then I had personally pulled on each one of those shock cords to make sure that it would not rip loose with at least 25 pounds of force. Anyway, parachute secured, and did I mention the spill hole I had cut in the top? Just to make sure that that original pop as the thing came open didn't rip anything. Put this thing together. I put an altimeter in it, which would actually beep out the altitude when it would hit the ground. So the number of beeps would tell you what had happened. Anyway, back in these days, it had a set of half-inch tubes on the side, and you would put it on a half-inch steel rod. The winds were up. I leaned the thing into the wind most vigorously. And then I remember them calling, the range safety officer made sure that there were no planes approaching, and they called out the countdown. 3, 2, 1. I had an eagle-eye friend with me with vision that's beyond 20/20 back in those days, just because I couldn't see that well and I wanted him to track it. He had binoculars. Here we are. And launch. All I remember seeing is that the half-inch rod that I had carefully leaned into the wind at about 15 degrees, the rocket was hanging on the low end of that rod, and 500 pounds of thrust said, you leaned the rod? Ha! It pointed. It bent the rod, and the whole stand lifted off the ground with the 500 pounds of raw initial thrust. It pointed straight towards heaven. Yes, indeed it did. And it blasted forth with an 11-foot flame, and then all I remember is that it disappeared from the space-time continuum and was gone. There was no smoke trail. There was nothing. It was like an arrow leaving the bow. Into the heavens it went. We waited. We waited. Nothing. I asked my friend with vision beyond, and he looked through his binoculars. You could see nothing. 2.5 minutes later, someone called out, "Did it have a black parachute?" Yes, indeed it did. A black umbrella. Do you see it? Pointed. Look over at my eagle-eye friend. Do you have an eye on it? Yes, I do. My heart leapt for joy. The 1 mile project to God's glory has undoubtedly succeeded, I thought to myself. And indeed, we marched the requisite half-mile over to where it lay, boots muddied with the deep, dark earth that lay before us in the sod farms. And there we were. I listened to the beeping. Indeed, 5 beeps. What would the next one be? 7 beeps. I knew victory was mine. 2-1. 5,721 feet. And my name would live in immortality in the club records as being part of the 1 Mile Club. I hope you enjoyed that. Keep the noodles fresh and the neurons firing.